Hello, 20th century. Well, this is part two of my explanation of the Holocaust notes. Now, part one was a lengthy video where I tried to explain the beginnings of the Holocaust. For instance, when did it start? How do we define it? Who are the victims of the Holocaust? And what are some of the first things done by Nazi Germany? But the focus of mainly that video would be the thoughts and the actions behind what the Nazis would eventually do in organizing and carrying out the mass murder of between 11 and 12 million people, half of that number Jewish people. So now what we're going to move on to is actions taken by the Nazi government that would be called part one or phase one of the Holocaust. Now, this is the part of the Holocaust that really has to happen so that part two, which is the more infamous part, the violent stage, the camp stage that you know about, part one has to happen before part two can happen. So phase one of the Holocaust is the nonviolent phase. And phase one of the Holocaust can be summed up in maybe two ideas. One of those ideas about phase one of the Holocaust is out of sight, out of mind. So the Nazi government would try to get the Jewish population in Germany removed, visibly removed from society, so people would not think about their neighbors, would not think about some of the people they did business with. And if you don't think about this person, don't see this person, then what happens to this person is off of your radar and might not be an issue for you. Another part of phase one of the Holocaust was to make life for German Jews uncomfortable in Germany. So uncomfortable that German Jews would want to leave the country. They would want to move away from Germany and therefore would not be a problem for Nazi Germany anymore. So let's go ahead and begin with phase one of the Holocaust, the nonviolent phase. Again, I will be reading much of the notes to you. Here we go. So phase one of the Holocaust occurs from 1933, when the Nazis take over, up until 1939, when World War II begins. All right, well, what are some of the first direct actions towards Jewish people by the Nazi government? Well, in 1933, here there are 5 actions that I have listed. Here they are. Number 1, the Nazi government encourages non-Jewish people in Germany to boycott Jewish shops and businesses. Essentially, don't spend your money in Jewish shops and Jewish businesses, with the idea being that if Jewish shops and businesses begin to lose sales and begin to not make profits, then the owners of these shops and businesses might close them down and maybe move to a country where they're more accepted. Number 2, and number 3. Number 2 says all non-Aryans or all non-perfect German people, especially Jews, lost government jobs. Number 3, all non-Aryans were made to leave the legal profession, and no new judges and lawyers could be Jewish. So we're looking at 2 and 3, other occupations and jobs that Jewish people had in Germany. They lost those. And if you lose your job, you might become desperate. And if you can't find another job in your current town or in your current country, what should you do? Well, you need to move. You need to leave. That's what the Nazis were trying to do, make life uncomfortable for Jewish people. Next, it said Jewish doctors were limited on which patients they could see. Finally, number 5, Jewish students were limited on how many of them could attend the same schools. So, if you look at all 5 of these, the goal is to make Jewish people realize essentially that you're not wanted in Germany. There's no future for you in Germany. Economically, it just doesn't work. Socially, people don't want to see you and visit you. And so the idea is that you make a choice. And that choice is stay in Germany where life is difficult or move to another place outside of Germany where life may be better. So we can see part 1 of the Holocaust is not violent. Part 1 is the idea that we want Jewish people to leave. And then, of course, if you're a non-Jewish person and you have to change your doctor who's not a Jewish person, if you are a student at school and Jewish children are no longer your classmates, the idea here is that you're not exposed to Jewish people anymore. You don't talk to them. You don't make friends with them. You don't socialize with them. So out of sight, out of mind. So if you begin to not associate with Jewish people anymore and lose those relationships and friendships, maybe you don't think about these people as much anymore. And then later on, if you don't think about them, what will happen to them might not be on your radar, to the point where what happens to them, maybe you don't care so much anymore. And so then a violent phase can occur because phase one has removed Jewish people from your radar screen. All right, let's move on. Well, those first regulations in 1933 were not all. Next, in 1935, the Nazi government defined who a Jewish person was. So how would you know who has to lose a certain job? How would you know what children have to leave a certain school? Well, the Nazis defined being a Jew as anyone that had 3 Jewish grandparents, belonged or lived in a part of town where Jewish people lived, married somebody who was Jewish. So if you were non-Jewish but married a Jewish person, by law you became Jewish. Also, the Nazis even said people who were half Jewish, called Mischlinge, where if you had 2 Jewish grandparents or even 1 Jewish grandparent. So the Nazis defined who was Jewish, who then was subject to these rules and regulations that made life uncomfortable. In 1935, sterilization programs began for handicapped people and gypsies in Germany, and intermarriage then is prohibited as well. So if you are a Jewish person, you cannot marry somebody who is a Christian or a non-Jewish person. Again, these are things that make people understand that life just isn't the same, and maybe you should leave Germany. From 1937 to 1939, Jews were excluded from attending all public schools. They can't go to movie theaters. Jewish people can't go to vacation resorts in Germany. They could not even live or walk in certain parts of town in Germany. So if you don't see them in town anymore, you don't see them at theaters or schools or vacation resorts, that whole out of sight, out of mind mentality takes over. And again, if you don't see someone, you're not familiar with someone anymore, you really don't think about their future and what might happen to them. And when I say don't think about them, to the point where maybe if something negative happens to them, since they're not on your radar, you really don't care so much about them. All right. Also, it says, and from 1937 to 1939, Jewish people are forced from economic life. Well, what's the message? In a sense, if you owned a Jewish shop or business, the Nazi government made you give that up. The government might have bought that business from you at very, very little cost, so you lost money. But essentially, the idea here is that we're going to hurt you monetarily. And so, would you rather stay here in Germany where there's no future for you, or should you leave and go someplace else? So the idea was you should move and go someplace else. It says here that in 1938, there was an event that would change things. This event is a famous one, and it happened in the fall of 1938. It's called Kristallnacht, which means the night of broken glass. This is going to be a change in policy of Nazi Germany. And so it says that on this night, there was a complete destruction of Jewish businesses and synagogues, which are Jewish churches, and homes. So the stormtroopers were given the order just to basically rampage through towns and villages wherever there was a Jewish presence and destroy the property and to make life very difficult for Jewish people. During this one night, 20,000 arrests occurred. Also during this night, murders occurred as well. Now, these types of arrests and murders had not happened up until this point. I guess you could say that the Nazi government realized that after 5 years of mistreating Jewish people and making laws that said they couldn't go here or do this job, maybe this out of sight, out of mind policy was beginning to sink into non-German people's minds. So the Nazi government changed things and began a violent phase towards Jewish people. This night is the first roundup of Jewish men because they're Jewish people, and they are sent to that first concentration camp called Dachau. The Jewish community is fined $1 billion as a result of this night, so again, making life economically tough. After this, Jewish people and the rest of the world begin to see that the Nazis are starting to change their policies, change their approach. They get a glimpse of things that will happen. Franklin Roosevelt denounced the Germans on this night. Many German Jews falsely believed that because Franklin Roosevelt spoke out against Hitler, that when the time came, that these German Jewish people would be allowed to enter the United States. Well, unfortunately for them, that would not be true. It says here, the goal of the Nazis with regard to the Jews during the first part of the Holocaust was to remove them from public life, out of sight, out of mind, and force them to leave the country. Basically let Jewish people understand that there's no future for you here. And this last event, Kristallnacht, was basically kind of maybe a last effort by the Nazi government, which was a violent one, that told Jewish people, it's time for you to go. Finishing up phase 1, it says, well, what was the response to the Nazi measures before World War II began? Well, the world knew what was happening to Jewish people in Germany because the Nazis had publicized these things. None of phase 1 of the Holocaust was a secret. The Nazis wanted the world to know how life for Jewish people was becoming difficult, so that other countries would be welcoming and accepting of Jewish immigrants. Remember, the plan of the Nazis in part 1 of the Holocaust was to get Jewish people to leave Germany. Anti-Jewish feelings, though, unfortunately, were common in other countries, so immigration was limited. America is an example of that. Basically, it was difficult to gain entrance into other countries, and those countries that did allow Jews in only let in a small number. Well, there were international meetings that were held to discuss what should happen to Jewish people in Germany. How can other countries help them? It says international meetings concerning the refugees from Germany and Europe were held, but no country, including America, would change its immigration policies. So no country wanted the Jews here in their own country. So I guess as we finish part 1 of the Holocaust, the idea here is that the Nazis made life difficult for Jewish people. The Nazis were hoping that Jewish people would leave and move out of Germany. Well, that only works if other countries are opening their doors to these Jewish people. And unfortunately, other countries are not welcoming to Jewish people. So the Jews are not welcome in Germany. They're not welcome anyplace else. So then phase 2 of the Holocaust is going to begin. That will be the violent phase. This is the end of part 2 of my video.